The silver corridors of Galactic Academy Station hummed with nervous energy as hundreds of students from across the galaxy prepared for their most terrifying academic challenge. The air itself seemed thick with fear, carrying whispered prayers in dozens of alien languages and the metallic scent of anxiety that transcended species barriers. Emma Thompson shuffled through the gleaming hallways, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as she clutched a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and fumbled with her backpack zipper with the other. She had overslept again, a habit that drove her Earth-based professors to distraction and had already earned her several stern warnings from Academy staff. The massive briefing chamber doors loomed before her, their surface decorated with warning symbols from every known civilization. Emma pushed through just as the ancient proctor began speaking, causing every head in the room to turn toward the interruption. The silence that followed was so complete that her coffee cup's gentle clink against her backpack's water bottle echoed like thunder. "How wonderful that you could join us, Miss Thompson." The proctor's voice rumbled through the chamber like grinding stone mixed with distant lightning. The ancient being's form shifted constantly, sometimes appearing as geometric patterns, other times as half-remembered nightmares that hurt to look at directly. Emma offered an apologetic wave and found an empty seat near the back, completely missing the looks of horror and disgust from her fellow students. Around her, beings from dozens of worlds sat rigid with terror, their various appendages trembling as they contemplated what lay ahead. The crystalline Zephyrians clinked softly in disapproval, their geometric bodies refracting the chamber's light into sharp, judgmental rainbows. Each of their kind had spent months preparing for this day, calculating defense strategies and building mathematical shields in their computer-like minds. Their leader, a being whose name translated roughly to Perfect Angle 7, had not slept in weeks as it ran probability calculations for survival. Near the front, the telepathic Mindari sat in perfect stillness, their large, luminous eyes closed as they practiced consciousness fragmentation techniques passed down through generations. Their mental whispers, usually a constant background hum in any gathering, had ceased entirely as they focused on preparing their minds for the ultimate test of willpower. The hive-minded Koloth occupied an entire section, their individual bodies swaying in perfect synchronization as their shared consciousness worked to build collective mental defenses. Each member would serve as both shield and sword for their hive mates, creating layers of protection that had taken their species millions of years to perfect. Emma, meanwhile, was quietly solving a crossword puzzle she had torn from yesterday's newspaper, her pen moving confidently across the grid as she filled in 7 across, puzzle enthusiast. The scratching of her pen seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "The mind maze test," the proctor continued, its voice carrying the weight of countless academic dreams crushed over millennia, "is not merely an examination. It is a living entity of pure psychic energy that burrows deep into your consciousness, seeking out every weakness, every fear, every shameful memory hidden in the darkest corners of your mind." A collective shudder ran through the assembled students. Several of the more sensitive species began showing physical signs of distress, their skin changing color or their breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "The maze adapts to each mind it encounters," the ancient being explained, its form shifting to display horrifying images of previous test subjects. "It becomes more cunning, more vicious, more perfectly designed to break you with each passing moment. It feeds on your terror and grows stronger from your despair." Emma looked up from her puzzle, interested despite herself. "Excuse me," she said, raising her hand like she was back in elementary school. "When you say it adapts, do you mean it follows predictable patterns, or is it more random?" The proctor's form flickered with what might have been surprise. In its thousands of years of administering the test, no student had ever asked for technical clarification with such casual curiosity. "The maze learns," it replied slowly. "It studies your responses and adjusts its strategies accordingly." "Fascinating," Emma murmured, making a note in the margin of her crossword. "Adaptive problem solving. I love those kinds of puzzles." The nearby students stared at her in amazement. To describe the mind maze test as a puzzle was like calling a supernova a bright light or a black hole a vacuum cleaner. "The current failure rate," the proctor continued, regaining its ominous momentum, "stands at 38%. Those who fail often emerge, changed. Their minds broken, their personalities shattered, their futures destroyed. Some never emerge at all, lost forever in infinite loops of their own psychological torment." This time, several students actually fainted. The Zephyrians' crystal bodies began resonating at frequencies that indicated extreme distress, while the Mindari's mental barriers started leaking emotions of pure terror into the telepathic atmosphere. Emma finished her crossword and started on the Sudoku puzzle printed on the back, humming softly to herself as she worked through the number patterns. Her complete lack of concern was so jarring that even the proctor seemed to lose its train of thought. Perhaps, the ancient being said finally, we should begin the preparation period. You have 6 hours to ready yourselves through whatever methods your species considers appropriate. Use this time wisely, for many of you will not survive what comes next. As the chamber emptied, students rushing to meditation halls and preparation chambers across the station, Emma remained in her seat, working on her puzzle and sipping her coffee. She seemed genuinely excited about the challenge ahead, treating the legendary mind maze test like an interesting afternoon activity rather than a potential death sentence. The Academy's preparation halls buzzed with frantic activity as students from across the galaxy engaged in their species' most sacred mental conditioning rituals. Each race had developed these techniques over millions of years, refining them through countless generations of academic pressure and psychological warfare. In the Eastern Wing, the Zephyrians arranged themselves in perfect geometric formations that would have made ancient Earth mathematicians weep with joy. Their crystalline bodies hummed at precise frequencies, creating invisible shields of pure mathematics around their computer-like minds. Perfect Angle 7 stood at the center of the formation, its facete surface glowing as it ran complex calculations that filled the air with soft chiming sounds. The defensive matrix must account for 17 different psychological attack vectors, it announced to its fellow crystals. I have spent 43 days calculating the optimal arrangement of mental barriers. Each thought must be protected by prime number sequences and geometric proofs. The other Zephyrians nodded in unison, their bodies refracting light into dazzling patterns as they synchronized their mathematical defenses. They had turned their minds into living fortresses of logic and calculation, believing that pure reason could protect them from the maze's emotional attacks. Meanwhile, in the northern chambers, the telepathic Mindari practiced something far more dangerous. Their leader, whose name roughly translated to many thoughts dancing as one, guided them through consciousness fragmentation exercises that would have driven most species completely insane within minutes. Split your awareness into 7 streams, many thoughts instructed, his large eyes glowing within a light. Let each fragment hold a different piece of your identity. When the maze attacks one fragment, the others remain hidden and protected. The Mindari students closed their eyes and began the terrifying process of deliberately breaking their own minds into pieces. Their telepathic whispers filled the chamber as they practiced becoming multiple people at once, each personality serving as both shield and decoy for the others. Some students began speaking in different voices as their fragmented selves took turns controlling their bodies. In the southern halls, the hive-minded Koloth worked in perfect synchronization, their individual consciousness merging into something larger and more powerful than the sum of its parts. Queen Voice Beta, their designated leader for this exercise, stood motionless as dozens of her hive mates arranged themselves in defensive patterns around her. We are one mind in many bodies, they chanted in perfect unison, their voices creating harmonies that resonated through the metal walls. What attacks one of us must face all of us. What breaks one of us strengthens all of us. The Koloth's strategy was simple but brilliant. By sharing their consciousness across multiple bodies, they could absorb psychological damage collectively, preventing any single mind from bearing the full weight of the maze's assault. Each species believed their approach was superior, having evolved their techniques through countless generations of survival and academic pressure. The preparation halls echoed with chanting, crystal singing, and the whispered mantras of a dozen different civilizations, all desperately trying to prepare for what many considered the ultimate test of intelligence and willpower. Emma Thompson, however, had claimed a quiet corner of the Academy's library where she sat cross-legged on a comfortable chair, working her way through a collection of puzzle books she had brought from Earth. Her study materials looked almost insultingly casual compared to the elaborate mental preparations happening throughout the station. Interesting, observed Professor Mindel Ka, an elderly Zephyrian who served as the Academy's leading expert on comparative psychology. The crystal being approached Emma's corner with scientific curiosity, its geometric form reflecting the library's soft lighting in fascinating patterns. Emma looked up from her Sudoku puzzle, noting the professor's interest. Oh, hello there. Beautiful crystal work, by the way. Are you here to study too? The concept seemed to confuse the professor. Study? Are you not preparing for the mind maze test through defensive mental conditioning? Well, I am doing mental exercises, Emma replied cheerfully, holding up her puzzle book. But I wouldn't call them defensive. They're just fun. Professor Mindel Ka's crystal form began vibrating at frequencies that indicated extreme confusion. The idea of finding mental challenges enjoyable was so alien to most galactic species that several nearby students stopped their own preparation to stare. Fun? the professor repeated, as if the word were in a foreign language. You derive pleasure from mental strain and cognitive difficulty. Absolutely. There's something really satisfying about finding patterns and solving problems. Like this Sudoku here, see how the numbers have to fit together just right? It's like a little mystery that you get to solve one clue at a time. Word of the strange humans preparation methods spread quickly through the Academy's communication networks. Students began abandoning their meditation to observe Emma's bizarre behavior. She seemed genuinely relaxed and happy, treating mental challenges as entertainment rather than threats to be defended against. As the hours passed, the contrast became even more striking. The Zephyrians grew more rigid and mathematical in their preparations, their crystal bodies glowing brighter as they reinforced their mental defenses. The Mindari became increasingly fragmented, some students beginning to show signs of dangerous personality splits. The Colotha's hive mind grew more intense and synchronized, their individual identities dissolving into their collective consciousness. Emma, meanwhile, worked through crossword puzzles, word searches, and logic problems with obvious enjoyment. She even started sharing interesting clues with nearby students, trying to engage them in casual puzzle-solving conversations. Look at this one, she called out to a nervous Zephyrian. 15 across, geometric figure with infinite sides. Pretty clever, right? The crystal being calculated frantically before responding. A circle, obviously. But why would you waste mental energy on recreational mathematics when you should be building defensive protocols? Emma grinned. Because it's not a waste if you enjoy it. Besides, I think the best way to prepare for a mental challenge is to have fun with mental challenges. This philosophy was so fundamentally different from everything the galactic academic community believed that it sparked heated debates in preparation chambers across the station. The testing chamber stood at the very heart of Galactic Academy Station, a perfect sphere of polished black metal that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols covered its surface, writhing and changing when observed directly, making students dizzy just from looking at them. The air around the chamber crackled with psychic energy that made sensitive species feel nauseous and disoriented. Inside the sphere, pure mental force writhed like living smoke, forming patterns that hurt to contemplate. Colors that had no names twisted through dimensions that should not exist, while sounds that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the brain whispered terrible promises of failure and madness. The ancient testing entity materialized as students approached, its form shifting between geometric impossibilities and half-remembered nightmares from 1,000 different worlds. Sometimes it appeared as a collection of burning eyes, other times as mathematical equations that screamed, and occasionally as the deepest fear of whoever was looking at it. Perfect Angle 7, the Zephyrian honor student, entered first. His crystalline form glowed with confidence as his mathematical shields hummed at precisely calculated frequencies. The other students watched through viewing windows as he stepped into the swirling psychic energy and vanished from sight. 3 hours and 17 minutes later, the chamber doors opened with a sound like reality tearing. Perfect Angle 7 stumbled out, several of his crystal facets cracked and clouded, his usual geometric precision reduced to chaotic stuttering. He had passed, but his mathematical perfection was broken forever. The equations, he whispered to his fellow Zephyrians, his voice distorted by damaged vocal crystals. They made the equations scream. Numbers became monsters. Logic became lies. The Mindari students went next, their consciousness already fragmented into multiple streams as they entered the chamber. Many thoughts dancing as one led the way, his awareness split into 7 different personalities, each one holding a piece of his true identity. The wait was longer this time. 4 hours passed before the first Mindari emerged, but when the doors opened, only 3 of the 7 students walked out. The others remained inside, their minds lost in infinite loops of their own fragmented consciousness. Those who survived spoke in tongues, switching between their different personalities so rapidly that their words became meaningless babble. We saw ourselves, one survivor gasped, his eyes unfocused and wild. All of ourselves. Every fragment became real. They fought each other. Some of us are still fighting in there. The Colotha's hive mind approach seemed more promising at first. Their shared consciousness allowed them to support each other even when separated by the maze's twisted geometry. Queen Voice Beta led 30 of her hive mates into the chamber, their mental connection strong and unified. But hive minds have a terrible weakness that individual consciousness does not. When one member panicked, the fear spread instantly through their shared awareness like wildfire through dry grass. Within minutes, the entire hive was caught in a cascade failure of terror and despair. Half the Colotha emerged catatonic, their minds shattered by experiencing 30 different psychological breakdowns simultaneously. The others had to be sedated as they screamed in perfect unison, their individual voices creating harmonies of pure madness. Student after student entered the chamber. Some emerged broken but passing. Others never emerged at all, their minds claimed by the maze's infinite corridors of psychological torment. The viewing galleries filled with the sounds of weeping and prayers as classmates watched their friends disappear forever into the swirling darkness. As Emma's turn approached, her fellow students watched with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The human seemed remarkably calm for someone about to face what many considered academic death. She finished the last clue of her crossword puzzle, wrote mental challenge in 12 down, and tucked the newspaper into her backpack with casual efficiency. "Ready when you are," she told the ancient entity, which materialized before her as a writhing mass of impossible angles and screaming geometric shapes that hurt to perceive directly. The entity paused, studying this strange creature who showed no fear, no preparation, no respect for the magnitude of what lay ahead. In its millennia of administering the test, it had never encountered such casual indifference to impending psychological warfare. "You understand," the entity intoned, its voice like the grinding of cosmic gears mixed with the whispers of dying stars, "that this test will strip away every pretense, every comfortable lie you tell yourself about who you are. It will expose the darkest corners of your mind and use your own fears as weapons against your sanity." Emma nodded politely, as if the entity had just explained the rules of a board game. "Sounds fascinating. Is there a time limit or scoring system?" The ancient being flickered with something that might have been confusion. No student had ever asked about administrative details while standing at the threshold of psychological destruction. "There is no limit save your own breaking point," it replied finally. "No score save survival or madness." "Excellent." Emma stepped toward the chamber's entrance with obvious enthusiasm. "I do love a good mental challenge." The massive doors began to seal behind her with sounds like reality being torn and rewoven. Emma found herself standing in a corridor that stretched infinitely in both directions, its walls pulsing with organic life and covered in symbols that writhed and changed when observed directly. Most students would have immediately begun constructing mental defenses against the maze's psychological assault, drawing upon generations of species-specific conditioning to protect their sanity from what was coming. Instead, Emma pulled out a pencil and started sketching the writhing symbols on the back of her coffee-stained napkin. They reminded her of the cryptogram puzzles in her Sunday crossword collection, and she had always been particularly good at those. "Now this," she said to herself with genuine delight, "looks like fun." Inside the maze, Emma's experience was completely different from every student who had come before her. Where others encountered manifestations of their deepest fears and most shameful memories, she found herself surrounded by what appeared to be an elaborate three-dimensional puzzle that stretched in all directions. The maze's first challenge presented itself as a long corridor lined with mirrors, each reflection showing a different version of herself. Some showed her as a brilliant scientist, others as a complete failure, and still others as versions of herself she might have been if she had made different choices in life. The mirrors were designed to trigger crippling self-doubt, trapping students between competing self-images until their minds broke from the contradictions. The Zephyrians who had faced this section reported spending hours trapped between different reflections, their computer-like minds unable to process the logical impossibilities presented by seeing themselves succeed and fail simultaneously. Several had emerged with permanent damage to their mathematical reasoning abilities. Emma studied the mirrors for exactly 37 seconds, then began looking for patterns in their arrangement. She counted them carefully, noting their positions and the types of reflections they showed. "Interesting," she muttered, pulling out her pencil and making notes on her napkin. 7 mirrors show positive outcomes, 7 show negative outcomes, but the 8th one always shows me exactly as I am right now. Classic puzzle structure, the answer is always hidden in the pattern. She walked directly to the 8th mirror, the one that showed her current self holding a pencil and looking thoughtful, and stepped through it without hesitation. The psychological manipulation designed to paralyze students with existential uncertainty had been completely bypassed by treating it as a simple pattern recognition exercise. The next section manifested as a labyrinth of shifting walls covered in alien script that glowed and pulsed with malevolent energy. The writing was designed to drive students to distraction as they tried to decode messages that weren't meant to be understood, only feared. Previous test takers had reported seeing their own names written in the script, along with detailed descriptions of their failures and inadequacies. Emma immediately recognized the alien writing as a substitution cipher, similar to the cryptogram she solved every morning with her breakfast. The letters might look strange and threatening, but the underlying structure was familiar and comforting. "Let's see," she said, sitting cross-legged on the maze floor and spreading her napkin notes in front of her. If this symbol appears most frequently, it's probably representing a common vowel like your. And this one appears at the beginning of many words, so it's likely TOH. Within 15 minutes, she had cracked the code and discovered that the supposedly terrifying alien messages were actually directions to the next section, written in a simple substitution cipher based on English alphabet patterns. Their ancient alien script even included helpful hints like turn left at the third junction, and watch out for the illusion pit ahead. The maze's adaptive algorithms, designed to escalate psychological pressure based on each subject's stress responses, found themselves in completely uncharted territory. Emma's stress levels remained remarkably low, her brainwave patterns showing the same relaxed focus she displayed while doing Sunday crosswords. The maze's artificial intelligence had no protocols for dealing with someone who found its challenges genuinely entertaining. As Emma progressed deeper into the maze, each section revealed itself as another type of mental puzzle disguised as psychological warfare. She encountered spatial reasoning tests masquerading as reality-bending corridors, logic problems hidden behind impossible philosophical dilemmas, and pattern recognition exercises concealed within swirling vortexes of apparent chaos. What had taken other students hours of agonizing psychological struggle, Emma completed in minutes of engaged problem-solving. She even began humming cheerfully as she worked, occasionally pausing to appreciate particularly clever puzzle design. "Oh, that's brilliant!" she exclaimed when she discovered a section where the floor tiles formed a massive sliding puzzle that revealed the exit when solved correctly. Whoever designed this really understands how to make mental challenges engaging. The maze tried everything in its vast arsenal of psychological weapons. It created illusions of Emma's childhood fears, but she studied them like interesting visual puzzles, noting how the perspective tricks worked. It manifested her deepest insecurities as physical obstacles, but she approached them as logic problems to be solved rather than emotions to be feared. When the maze attempted to trap her in recursive loops of self-doubt, she simply mapped out the repetitive patterns until she found the exit sequence. When it tried to overwhelm her with impossible choices, she applied decision tree analysis techniques she had learned from strategy puzzle games. The ancient entity monitoring her progress found itself experiencing something unprecedented in its millennia of existence: complete bewilderment. Its most sophisticated psychological warfare techniques were being systematically dismantled by someone who treated them as recreational brain teasers. Emma's approach was so fundamentally different from every other test taker that the maze's adaptive systems began to malfunction. The artificial intelligence that controlled the test had been designed to escalate psychological pressure, but Emma's consistently positive responses to its challenges created feedback loops that confused its programming. "This is absolutely fascinating," Emma said to herself as she solved what appeared to be a three-dimensional maze within a maze. "It's like the ultimate puzzle box. Every solution reveals a new layer of complexity." She was genuinely having fun, treating the legendary mind maze test like an afternoon of recreational puzzle solving rather than a life-or-death battle for her sanity. Her enthusiasm was so authentic and her approach so refreshingly different that even the ancient entity found itself curious about what she would do next. Emma emerged from the testing chamber after exactly 47 minutes and 12 seconds, setting a new academy record that shattered centuries of academic tradition. She looked refreshed and energetic, like someone who had just enjoyed a particularly satisfying afternoon of recreational puzzles rather than survived the galaxy's most feared psychological ordeal. The ancient testing entity materialized before her, its usual terrifying form flickering with uncertainty and confusion. For the first time in its millennia of existence, it seemed almost vulnerable, like a computer program trying to process data that didn't fit any of its established parameters. "This is unprecedented," the entity managed, its voice lacking the usual ominous authority that had terrified generations of students. "In 3,000 years of administering this test, no candidate has ever completed it in less than 2 hours. Most require between 4 and 7 hours, assuming they survive at all." Emma beamed with genuine enthusiasm, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved an exceptionally challenging puzzle. "That was absolutely brilliant," she exclaimed, pulling out her crumpled napkin covered with notes and sketches. "I haven't had that much fun with puzzles since I discovered those Japanese logic games last summer." The assembled faculty members and surviving students stared in stunned silence. Professor Mindel Ka's crystalline form was vibrating at frequencies that indicated extreme confusion, while the few remaining college students were attempting to process through their damaged hive mind how their greatest academic terror had somehow become another person's source of entertainment. "The way you led the different challenge types was genius," Emma continued, completely oblivious to the shock she was causing. Spatial reasoning tests disguised as reality-bending corridors, logic puzzles hidden behind philosophical dilemmas, pattern recognition exercises concealed in those swirling chaos vortexes. Whoever designed this system really understood how to create engaging cognitive challenges. The ancient entity, which had been programmed to test the very limits of consciousness itself, found itself frantically taking notes on what the human was saying. This had never happened before in its entire existence. "You enjoyed the experience?" it asked, its voice smaller and more uncertain than anyone had ever heard it. "Absolutely. Though I did notice a few areas where the difficulty progression could be smoothed out," Emma replied, consulting her napkin notes. "The mirror section was a bit too easy once you spotted the mathematical sequence pattern. And the substitution cipher in the alien script section became repetitive after you cracked the basic letter frequency analysis." She looked up at the entity with helpful enthusiasm. "If you'd like, I could suggest some improvements. Maybe you could incorporate some crossword-style wordplay elements, or add Sudoku-like number grid challenges to the spatial reasoning sections. Oh, and those recursive loop traps could be much more interesting if you made them actual logic mazes instead of just psychological pressure chambers." The idea that someone would offer constructive criticism on the mind maze test was so completely outside the realm of possibility that several faculty members had to sit down. The test wasn't supposed to be improved or enjoyed, it was supposed to be survived, barely, if at all. News of Emma's unprecedented performance spread through the Academy's communication networks at the speed of light. Within hours, academic institutions across the galaxy were requesting detailed reports on how a simple human had treated their most feared examination like recreational entertainment. The implications were staggering. For millions of years, galactic education had been built on the principle that intelligence was measured by how well minds could defend themselves against psychological warfare. Students spent decades learning to fortify their consciousness against mental attacks, building elaborate defensive structures in their minds. Emma had proven that there was another way entirely. Instead of defending against mental challenges, she had embraced them. Instead of fearing psychological complexity, she had found joy in it. Her approach suggested that true intelligence might not be about building mental walls, but about developing the flexibility to turn any problem into an opportunity for engagement. Within weeks, the Academy began developing entirely new assessment methods based on Emma's insights. Teams of educational psychologists worked around the clock to understand how recreational puzzle solving could be more effective than centuries of defensive mental conditioning. The mind maze test itself underwent massive redesigns. Instead of focusing on psychological warfare, the new version emphasized engaging problem solving that challenged different types of intelligence in ways that were difficult but enjoyable. Failure rates dropped from 38% to less than 5%, while student satisfaction scores increased dramatically. Emma became something of a celebrity throughout the galactic academic community, though she remained remarkably humble about her achievement. She could be found most afternoons in the Academy library, working on puzzle books and offering patient help to classmates who were learning to see mental challenges as opportunities for fun rather than threats to be endured. "The thing is," she explained to a group of fascinated Zephyrian students who had asked about her methods, "any problem looks terrifying until you find the right way to look at it. Once you figure out the underlying pattern or structure, it stops being scary and starts being interesting." She held up her current crossword puzzle as an example. "See this clue here? Galactic Institution of Learning, 8 letters. At first glance, it seems impossible if you don't know much about space education. But if you think about it systematically and consider what letters you already have from the crossing words, the answer becomes obvious." The Zephyrians calculated frantically before one of them chimed, "Academy." "Exactly." Emma smiled. "Every puzzle has a solution if you approach it with curiosity instead of fear. Even the ones that seem impossible at first." This simple philosophy was beginning to transform education across the galaxy, one puzzle at a time.